Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about my most anticipated new book releases that are all due to come out in the last 3 months of 2021. Just in case you didn't know this about me, I am a freelance book reviewer in addition to being a booktuber, and I regularly do research on what new books are coming out, what books are on the horizon, so I can know what to pitch to my editors. Well, because I'm in contact with my editors as well as book publicists, I'm hearing about a lot of new books constantly. So for every quarter of this year, I have put out a video featuring a selection of titles due to come out in that upcoming quarter that I am really excited about and I think you might have an interest in as well. So in this video, I'm going to be telling you about 20 books due to come out in October, November, and December of 2021. So hard to believe we are that close to the end of the year, but here we are. Something you'll notice about this list is that the months of October and November are far bigger months for publishing than December is. The fall/autumn season tends to be publishing's biggest time of year. They're taking advantage of the fact that temperatures are starting to cool off in the northern hemisphere, and they're hoping people will be turning to indoor activities. So that's one reason why they put books out around the fall, but also because the holiday season is approaching, and a lot of people give books as gifts for the holidays. So they're trying to put out their biggest titles so that they're on bookshelves, on tables at your local bookstore when you're looking for your gifts for the holidays. So you'll notice that there are a lot of books coming out in October and November, and things get mighty quiet after the first week of December. But you'll see what I mean as we go along. Let's take a look at the books. As always, there are some very big, very hot release dates within this quarter, days on which a whole bunch of different publishers choose to put out their books for sometimes mysterious reasons. One of those dates within this quarter is October 5th. There are 4 different books that I want to tell you about that are all coming out on that day. And the first one I want to tell you about is probably my most anticipated new release of the entire year. It's The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. Like this author's previous 2 books, this is a work of historical fiction. It's set in the summer of 1954, and it spans just 10 days, as several young men, fresh off stints at a juvenile work farm, hatch a plan to travel from Nebraska all the way east to New York City. I make no secret of the fact that this author's first book, Rules of Civility, is my favorite book of all time. So you better believe I am counting down the days until this one comes out. But another big name with a book coming out on October 5th is none other than Stanley Tucci. He has a memoir coming out called Taste: My Life Through Food. As the title of this book suggests, the actor is going to focus a lot on his relationship with food throughout his memoir. So from growing up in an Italian-American family, starring in big foodie movies like Julie and Julia, all the way up to authoring a few cookbooks himself. It seems like he's going to really discuss what food has meant throughout his life, but also talk about his life more generally throughout the book as well. I really like Stanley Tucci. I think a lot of people do. And I actually just recently watched Julie and Julia for the very first time, so that makes me all the more excited to read this. Next up for October 5th, we have another work of nonfiction coming out called Shelf Life: Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller by Nadia Wassef. This is a memoir written by one of the co-founders of the Cairo independent bookstore Diwan. She and her sister, along with one of their friends, opened up the bookstore in 2002 without any formal training, without business degrees, and at a time in Egypt when books were considered luxuries, not necessities. But against all the odds, the bookstore became a success, and this book tells that story. Like many others, I love a good book about books, and I am always rooting for the success of an independent bookstore, so I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on this one. And then the final book due to come out on the 5th of October that I wanted to mention in this video is a more somber one. It's called Squirrel Hill: The Tree of Life Synagogue Shooting and the Soul of a Neighborhood by Mark Oppenheimer. This book is due to come out ahead of the 3rd anniversary of the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting that happened here in Pittsburgh back in 2018. This book discusses the tragedy, of course, but it's also a portrait of the community in which it took place. The neighborhood of Squirrel Hill is a very beautiful place. It's one of the most special places that we have in Pittsburgh, and this is a really wonderful city, so it's extra special. I've spent so much time there over the course of almost a decade of living here. I was living here when the shooting happened in 2018, and just like I know a lot of other people living here felt, I was devastated on a level I couldn't even really comprehend, and I still really can't wrap my head around it. It hurt so bad having something like that happen in such a special neighborhood, and it was so hard seeing the name Squirrel Hill be plastered all over the national news and be defined by this atrocious act. This one's going to be a really difficult one for me to read because it literally hits so close to home, but I feel a responsibility to read this one and to spread the word about it because I think it's important to understand what happened. I think it's important to honor the memory of the victims. And I also think it's important to put out into the world a proper characterization of a beautiful neighborhood that deserves to be known for more than just an awful day in October of 2018. But now, on to the following Tuesday, October 12th, which is another really big day for publishing. There are 3 books in particular coming out on that day that I would like to highlight. The first of those 3 is another one I've been really looking forward to. It's called On Animals by Susan Orlean. This is a collection of Orlean's articles and essays that she's written for various publications over the years. And you guessed it, they're all about animals. So she covers things like big cats being kept in captivity, the life of a championship show dog, the freedom of killer whales, even how rabbits underwent a transition in the United States from being seen as food to being seen as pets. I think Susan Orlean's writing is fantastic, and I also love animals, so I'm really glad this collection is coming out. An intriguing celebrity book due to come out on October 12th is called Hooked: How Crafting Saved My Life. This is a memoir written by actress and Broadway star Sutton Foster. In this book, it seems like she's going to discuss how crafting has gotten her through so much throughout her epic career. So she started with cross-stitching, but then she moved on to crocheting, making collages, drawing, cooking. It seems like making things has been very therapeutic for her as she deals with the stresses of a high-powered career, but also personal stresses like going through a very public divorce, struggling with infertility, and then eventually adopting her daughter. I fell in love with Sutton Foster after seeing the one-season wonder TV show Bunheads. I still really need to watch her TV show Younger. That's been on my watch list for a very long time, but I had no idea she was a crafter. That makes me love her even more. This book sounds so lovely, so heartfelt, and I imagine it'll make me want to take up a crafting project. But speaking of a memoir that discusses fertility issues, the last October 12th release I wanted to mention in this video is a book called Flesh and Blood: Reflections on Infertility, Family, and Creating a Bountiful Life by N. West Moss. In this book, the author is going to discuss her own infertility and miscarriages, but it seems like the grander discussion within this book is about much more than that, because she's going to talk about the small wonders within her life, the ways in which previous generations of women in her family have inspired her. And she talks about all of this as she's coming to terms with the idea that she might represent the end of her family line. For whatever reason this year, I've noticed that there are a lot of books coming out about motherhood and women having to take alternative routes to become mothers because they want to be mothers, but they're not able to get pregnant traditionally, or women who have to give up the idea, the dream of becoming a mother because of different circumstances. I don't know why this year has been so hot for that kind of a book, but I've been really enjoying reading them. I think all these perspectives are really, really valuable. This one sounds very powerful, and of course, this cover is stunning. Then there's one book coming out on October 19th that I would like to share. It is actually the one and only YA title on this quarter's list, and it's called Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood. This is an Ethiopian-inspired magical retelling of Jane Eyre, in which a young exorcist is forced to take a job within the home of a demanding, eccentric, and also cursed heir named Magnus Rochester. I saw this author speak on a panel at Edelweiss's Book Fest a couple months back, and it made me all the more excited to read this. October 26th has 2 new releases that I would like to mention. The first is a novel called The Memoirs of Stockholm Sven by Nathaniel Ian Miller. This book is written as though it were a memoir, so we hear directly from the main character who flees a restless life in Stockholm in 1916 to go to the Arctic and become a miner. Well, after an avalanche nearly kills him, he retreats further into himself, further away from other people, and goes into the cold, unforgiving landscape. This is definitely one I want to read, but I'm probably not going to read it at the end of October. I'm probably going to save this book for the colder winter months so I can totally get lost in the setting of this book. I mean, tell me it doesn't sound like the perfect read for a cold winter night. But also on the 26th, there's a nonfiction book coming out that I would really like to read. It is called The Genome Defense: Inside the Epic Legal Battle to Determine Who Owns Your DNA by George L. Contreras. This book tells the story of how the ACLU sued biotech companies for getting patents on specific human genes. And then they would charge these exorbitant fees for doing hereditary testing to determine if people had specific diseases. They could charge so much because they had patents on the genes themselves. But this book goes one step further and doesn't just tell that story. It actually brings up a really interesting question, a really interesting topic of discussion, and that is, who gets to own parts of what makes us who we are? This book sounds really, really interesting for anyone like myself who enjoys reading about ethical and financial topics as they relate to healthcare, in the vein of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Those were all of the October books on my list, but now let's move on to November. And as I hope you know, November is nonfiction November here on BookTube and elsewhere around the internet. So of course, I have to start off the discussion of the month's new books with a couple of nonfiction titles. So on November 2nd, Egyptologist Kara Cooney's new book comes out, and it's called The Good Kings: Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World. This author's books always look in ancient Egypt, but she also likes to take the topic of focus and relate it to the modern world and show why it's still relevant today. So in this third book of hers, she's going to be talking about the lives of 5 different pharaohs and have a grander conversation about the concept of absolute power. A very timely conversation. I really like this author's previous 2 books, so as soon as I saw she had a new book coming out, I knew I was going to read it. Another nonfiction book coming out on the 2nd of November is called Aesop's Animals: The Science Behind the Fables by Jo Wimpenny. This is a critical look at the characterizations of animals within Aesop's fables, and at the end of each chapter, the author, who is a zoologist, gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down to a characterization based on the current science. Again, I love animals, hence why this appealed, but I also just have to note that the last name Wimpenny could not be more perfect if you're writing a book about fairy tales. That name sounds like it's straight out of a fairy tale. And then the third and final November 2nd release of note within this video is a work of fiction, and it's called Win Me Something by Kyle Lucia Wu. This is a coming-of-age novel following a biracial Chinese-American girl named Willa. Growing up, she feels like she doesn't really belong anywhere. She doesn't feel like she belongs at her mostly white school, but she also feels like she doesn't belong to any one family, given that her parents divorced when she was very young, they both remarried, and then started new families. But then when she gets to college, she starts working as a nanny for a white family, and she gets really close to them, which seems to force her to evaluate who she is and where she belongs. I have been really loving coming-of-age novels this year. This one sounds fantastic. It sounds like a really good one to move on to if you also really enjoyed Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid like I did. The following Tuesday, November 9th, is another huge release day. There are 4 books coming out that I want to tell you about, and the first one is as big of a book as books get, basically. It's going to be an enormous release. Everyone is likely going to be reading this and talking about it because Will Smith is coming out with a memoir called Will. I'm sure in this book he's going to talk about his very successful career, probably also his personal life, and I'm sure this book is going to contain a number of different plays off of his name, since the word Will means a lot of different things. I am not sure there's a bigger celebrity out there than Will Smith. He seems to be one of the most well-liked celebrities, period. So I know a ton of people are going to be picking this up and reading it. A lot of people will probably be gifting it for the holidays. I am also going to read it because I'm just so curious to find out what's in here. Another big November 9th book is 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King, author of Euphoria and Writers and Lovers, amongst other books. And this book is going to be her very first short story collection. My research indicates that she's been writing short stories throughout her career, but this will be the first time that she actually releases a collection of them. And while I'm normally not the biggest reader of short stories or short story collections, Lily King is one of those authors who inspires me to read everything she's written, so I will absolutely be reading this one. The third November 9th release is another nonfiction book about books, just like Shelf Life, but rather this one is actually a nonfiction book about libraries. It is called The Library, A Fragile History by Andrew Pettigrew and Arthur Dervedeva. For this one, I'm going to read you the synopsis, which I don't always like to do because I don't always think that the publisher's copy describes the book the best. I normally like to put it in my own words, but this one sounded so beautiful that I just had to share it with you. It says, in The Library, historians Andrew Pettigrew and Arthur Dervedeva introduce us to the antiquarians and philanthropists who shape the world's great collections, trace the rise and fall of literary tastes, and reveal the high crimes and misdemeanors committed in pursuit of rare manuscripts. In doing so, they reveal that while collections themselves are fragile, often falling into ruin within a few decades, the idea of the library has been remarkably resilient as each generation makes and remakes the institution anew. Beautifully written and deeply researched, The Library is essential reading for book lovers, collectors, and anyone who has ever gotten blissfully lost in the stacks. Doesn't that sound amazing? I absolutely love The Library. I especially love our library system here in Pittsburgh, so this one is absolutely going to be appearing on a future TBR, perhaps even for Nonfiction November. And then the final November 9th book that I wanted to mention is called By Any Other Name, A Cultural History of the Rose by Simon Morley. There may be no other flower more imbued with meaning than the rose. I mean, when you think about a rose, there is so much meaning that we as humans have attached to roses, like seduction and love, but untouchably so because of the thorns. This book looks at the human relationship with the popular flower over the centuries, and it sounds absolutely fascinating, although I will admit to being a little bit confused by the release date. If it's a book about a flower, you would think it would be coming out in the spring, but it's a book about the rose, so that would maybe imply a February release date. But anyway, since it's coming out right before the holidays, it could be a great gift for any flower lovers in your life. I might just get it as a gift for myself. But now we'll move into the new releases that are due to come out in the final month of 2021. And as I implied early on in this video, December is a rather quiet month for publishing. There's a big push at the beginning of the month to get those books out last minute for anyone looking to buy holiday gifts. But then publishing kind of goes on snooze. And it stays that way until maybe the second week of January. So everyone goes on vacation and they stay there until the new year starts. So all three books that I have to tell you about that come out in December of 2021, they're all going to be released on the first Tuesday of the month, which is December 7th. The first book is called Beasts of a Little Land by Juea Kim. This is historical fiction set in 20th century Korea, and it focuses on the intertwined fates of a young girl sold to a courtesan school and the penniless son of a hunter. This one sounds stunning, and I have really high hopes for it, especially because over the past few years, I have really started to fall in love with any books about or set in Korea. The second December release I wanted to tell you about is this book called Sea State by Tabitha Lastly, and it's a memoir unlike anything I've ever heard of before. The author of this book, for a period of time, decided to live on an oil rig, which is an exclusively male workplace, at least the one that she was on, and she did this because she wanted to see what men were like without women around. Except for her, of course, which had an impact on both her and the men. And in this book, she's going to discuss her experience. She's going to discuss masculinity and perceptions of it. And also she's going to talk about the bonds that the men working on this ship shared. I can't even begin to express how much I'm anticipating this book. I love reading about non-romantic, non-sexual relationships between men and women. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some romantic things in here because humans are going to human after all, but the prospect of reading about different types of relationships between men and women has me so excited to read this. And then the final December 7th book doubles as the final book on this list. That's 41 Love by Scarlett Thomas. This book is about a period of crisis in this author's life at age age 41 and how, at a moment in her life where it felt like everything was going wrong at once, she decided she wanted to revisit an old passion of hers that she had randomly given up at a very young age. Tennis. This one sounds so moving, and I'm doubly as attracted to it because I happen to be the sportsbook reviewer for the Christian Science Monitor. But regardless of whether or not we actually cover this one in the Monitor, I want to read it because I love reading about tennis. So those were my most anticipated new releases of the final quarter of 2021. To round out the year, I have now made a video for each of 2021's 4 quarters. If you missed any of those videos, or if you would like to revisit them now, that a lot of those release dates have come and gone, if you want to use them as resources as you build up a wish list for the holiday season, I will link those for you in the description box below. My next anticipated releases video will be coming out in December, and at that point, I will unbelievably start talking about books due to come out in 2022. So stay tuned for that. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video, if you're excited about any of these books, or if there are any books that you're excited about that I did not mention, please feel free to leave me a comment down in the comment section. But if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now, you can find me on a variety of different places around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram. The links to everywhere you can find me will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.